So hello, welcome. It is me, Martin Anderson, with you for the next little while. This should be a shorter show than normal this week due to several reasons, mainly being my dissertation. However, do give us a like, subscribe, and stay in touch for the next couple of weeks because you know what? I'm going to want my escape with wrestling. Now, coming up later on, we are going to talk about Raw, Smackdown, NXT, and we're going to look a little bit at what happened at the Impact pay-per-view and some of the stuff that's been happening in AEW as well. We're not going to go in depth in any of the shows. We're going to kind of cherry pick some of the big moments and see what's been the most exciting of the week. But the biggest section of the show this week is going to be the wrestling news. But before we go there, we do, of course, have to tackle what happened this week. Now, if you've followed us on Twitter at Headlock Takedown, you'll see that there's been some issues. Now, when it comes to the Stuart Murphy, JJ Andrews thing, in recent weeks, things have been a little bit less dramatic, shall we say. We did have the CWF takeover for the New Year special. We've also had JJ Andrews show up to do an interview as well. And that was kind of interesting. We managed to pick his brain about why this fallout was happening. And it all started as something that was meant to be fun and meant to lead to the CWF show that's taking place on June 19th. The only problem is at some point, Stuart Murphy decided to become the character he was meant to be playing. So what started as a bit of fun, and I agreed to air thinking it was fun, very quickly has become something very serious. Now, this week, there were some tweets put out. Basically, Stuart Murphy has crossed a line. And yes, JJ Andrews did kind of start all this. But JJ Andrews, for those that have been following, JJ Andrews basically went to Stuart Murphy's house and showed footage of him walking past his house. Safe to say, when you see what Stuart Murphy's done, he's taken it way too far.
Headlocks and Headphones does not endorse this advert, but is damn sure approved by CWF. Hello, Mr. JJ Andrews. You recognise the place? You really should learn to lock your door. Yep, because you don't know when I could arrive. That's a nice place you've got. Wonder if it'll still be so nice when you get back home. I'm here. Come get me. Ooh, coffee time. Look at this. Shambles. Let's see what we got in the way of. What we got in the way of cups here? Ooh, fancy. What's in here? It's a pretty disastrous fridge. Not much in the way of things I would eat in there, unfortunately. What's this? Ooh, washing machine doors open. Ooh, that's a smelly machine, that is. Ooh. It's rubbish. Still waiting to go out as well. Shambles. Absolute shambles. I made myself a cup of tea. Make myself at home, you know. Hi Jay. Love what you've done with the place. Love it. I'm having a cup of tea. Maybe get myself something out of the fridge. And I'll make myself at home. And I'll wait on you coming back. And we'll have this long awaited conversation. Look forward to it. Get me nearly done. Bye! Don't know where you are during the lockdown, Mr. Andrews, but I'm still waiting in your beautiful house on your arrival. Don't keep me waiting much longer. However, once I'm waiting from the safety of your couch, JJ Andrews,
I want to address Martin Anderson. And I would like to state, I don't like the fact that you allow this man on your show. I really don't. I mean, look, he's pushed my buttons that much that I've actually got into his house. I've not broken in, because the door was unlocked. But I'm here, and I'm waiting on him to have a face-to-face conversation like a man, after rubbing his face off the floor with my boot. But, Mr. Anderson, you've said some things about me as well, and I would like to... You have a chance to save yourself, is what I'm saying. So I would like to make you a conditional offer to be the host for show 1 of CWF, Cult Fresh Start. But there's 2 conditions to that offer. Condition number 1 is you apologise live on air of Headlocks and Headphones for the way you have treated me and spoke to me and spoke about me, and also for having JJ Andrews on your show as well. The second one is that you interview the real second entrant of the tournament, who I will name privately, so that you can interview him on your show. Accept these 2 conditions, and you can be host of show 1. Now that that's out of the way, allow me to put my feet up and continue waiting on JJ Andrews getting home. I mean, I don't know where he could be during a lockdown, but I have all day to wait in your home. Bye for now.
Na 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 na.
Yeah, let's sing it.
Hey hey hey, goodbye. Goodbye. Na 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 na.
Come on, sing it, Cole.
Hey hey hey, goodbye. Na 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 na. Come on, doctor. Hey hey hey, goodbye. Everybody. Na 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 na. Hey hey hey, goodbye.
So I was receiving messages from Murphy saying where he was. And I was trying to reach JJ Andrews for about an hour. And when he takes his dog for a walk, he turns his phone off. So we couldn't get hold of him. We couldn't tell him what was going on. And you know what? It's probably a good thing we didn't. But JJ was only several hundred yards away, out through his back garden on the other side of the estate. So it's a very big and bold move that Murphy did there. And he did say that he wants me to be the host of show 1. And my reward for this would be getting to interview all the participants in his 8-man tournament and the participants in his main event for Headlocks and Headphones. And that would be a great thing to do. I know some of the names, as you know from last week. I may have had to bleep one of them out, but I know the names are on the provisional list, and they'd be very cool people to interview. I don't think it's worth putting myself at risk. I don't think I want to attract the same level of obsession as Stuart Murphy seems to have with JJ Andrews. We were led to believe that this was all meant to be a bit of fun, and it started off as a bit of fun. Stuart Murphy's taking it too far. And I think for any invitation to be the guest host of show 1, the paranoid side of me kicks in, and I have to think, well, there must be a reason why he wants me to be there. I'm up in Aberdeen. He's down in Glasgow. It's the easiest way for him to get a hold of me is to have me come like a home delivery service straight to where he is. If Stone Cold Steve Austin was going to be at the show, I'd show up. If Bret the Hitman Hart was going to be at the show, I'd show up. CM Punk, maybe. Beyond that, I wouldn't take the gamble that this isn't just a chance for Murphy to physically take revenge on me if he can't get a hold of JJ. Because he knows I'm not a fighter. But he also knows I'm perhaps smarter than to just show up. So Murphy, let's make this official. I'm declining your invitation to host show 1, and I'm even declining your invitation to be at show 1. I don't know if that's how JJ Andrews feels, but safe to say, there's going to be some changes after what just happened, and this show and CWF's relationship has to change going forward. It cannot remain as it is. Whatever that means for me, whatever that means for Headlocks and Headphones, so be it. So from one slightly over-the-top personality in Scotland to one in America, let's look at Ryback. Now, Ryback's made some fairly controversial statements in recent weeks, and let's be fair, he's doing it to get attention on his podcast. Whether or not what he's saying is accurate or not is another story. Now, let's look at something that he was actually saying this week on his show. Now, he said that it costs more to be a main roster WWE star. Now, let's just look at a rough quote of what he said. Now, the formula was if you were in developmental, before you were traveling all the time, they would pay for your hotel and rental car for the first maybe 3 to 6 months, so you don't get an idea of the expenses. So you don't understand how the road expenses are. Then what they would do is offer you a new deal in that period, and a lot of times it was 150,000. It went up to 250,000, somewhere in that range. What guys don't realize though is they look at the money and go, "Oh my God, that's more than I make doing this." They sign and then they start paying hotels and rental cars, and that's why you see everybody riding together. It's because they can't afford to get their own. That money doesn't go as nearly as far, but if you're traveling and you don't have to the rental cars and hotels 5 nights a week, your road expenses, food and airports go down tremendously. So you can stretch that money out a little bit further. Now, this is the bit that's kind of, I think, proves exactly what Ryback's doing here. He says you can make more than that in a regular job. I'm sorry, but how many people do you know working in Walmart in America are making 150 grand a year? How many people do you know working in most jobs in America are making 150 grand a year? The guy is delusional. If you are going out on the road and you're unaware of what your expenses are going to be, considering most of the talent that WWE are putting onto the main roster now are guys who have come through the indie scene. Kevin Owens knew how to pay for his expenses. Sami Zayn, Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose. These guys all knew how to pay for their expenses. The fact that he was an idiot and clearly didn't, based on what he's saying, is very, very telling of how some people seem to think that WWE should kind of hand them everything on a plate. But no company's doing that. New Japan don't do that. AEW don't do that. Ryback seems to have this hard-on for WWE, and it really does weaken his position in many ways. And it's not because he's necessarily wrong, because arguably should the travel and everything for these people be getting paid? Well, there's an argument to say yes. However, when you go to sign your contract, you know that you have these expenses to pay. So you can negotiate your contract with that in mind. If you are willing to accept 150,000 or 250,000 or whatever that contract is, you can't then bitch and moan that you have to pay all these expenses out of pocket. You agreed the deal. The same thing happens at the BBC and various other places where people say, this person gets paid more than me. Yes, but you negotiate your deal. All you're doing is revealing to the world that you're the dumbass that didn't negotiate a good deal. You can disagree with me if you want, and that's fine. Perhaps WWE should be paying for these things. But if you take my example with radio background, if you want a radio job, you travel for that job. You go to that job. They don't pay you. And in most cases, if you're big enough that they would pay you. You're going to have a studio of your own, and you're just going to do it remotely anyway, so you don't have the expense. But guess what? Did the radio station pay for that remote studio? In most cases, no. That remote studio is yours. You bought it with your money that you negotiated. Ryback's an idiot. And if you ever become self-employed, or you ever become an independent contractor, and you feel that the company should pay all of your expenses, then you're an idiot. Because there isn't a company in the world that do that in the entertainment field. Yes, if you're an actor and you're traveling to Spain for 6 weeks, yes, they lay on food for you. They do pay for your accommodation and stuff, but that's part of a massive budget that has lots of investors, and it's built into the cost. Whereas as an independent contractor, as has been seen since WWE have went into doing their shows simply in one building, talent still have to make it from home to the venue, but there is a lot less traveling because there's no house shows. So these talent right now during lockdown are actually making more money, or at least spending less. What Ryback fails to mention in any of this is that when you look at Scott Hall's WWF contract, where he was getting 0.0 something % of merchandise sales, some talent in WWE are getting around 50% of that. So whilst he wants to say 250 grand, people working in regular jobs are making more, you idiot, that's so not true. But even if it were true, the merchandise money that a lot of these people are making far outweighs anything they make on the indie scene, and they do come out massively ahead. This idea that all wrestlers would travel on their own if they had the money is stupid. Because if you think about it, Owen Hart could afford to travel on his own. But why would he? Why would he spend all this extra money when you can share a car with a few people and you all save a bit of money? You all have that little bit more. What's wrong with that? If ever I'm traveling down to Glasgow and a friend of the show, Fred Gordy Bitch, is driving us down, we split the petrol costs. It's cheaper for him, it's cheaper for me. Saves us having to go on the Megadeth bus as well, which is always great. And that's part of what traveling with people is all about. Ryback, on the other hand, makes himself look like a bit of a cock. And maybe that's just my opinion, but I think he looks like a bit of a cock. Now, let's move on. WWE Hall of Famer Ric Flair took to Twitter today, posting a photo of himself with Hulk Hogan. He also gave credit to Hogan for helping him through some tough times. Now, what he said was, "We have made history, but more importantly, he has always been there for me through hard times. Thank you, Hulk Hogan." Now, I don't know about you. They had some big-time tension back in the day. But to see they've kind of got through that, and they're at a good point. I'm a big fan of Ric Flair and a big fan of Hulk Hogan. I know a lot of people aren't. But without Hogan, we wouldn't be here talking. We wouldn't be on this show. We wouldn't have the wrestling product that we have. Yes, we'd still have British wrestling. But what we would also have is a vastly, vastly different wrestling product. Some argue it'd be better, but it'd be smaller. It'd be more regional. We have bigger stars as a result of Hulk Hogan. We've lost some of the quality that the regional product used to have, but we also have more ability to watch wrestling. There are free YouTube shows like NWA. There's also WWE Network, which now has a free version, and YouTube, which, by the way, if you haven't explored that for your wrestling content, go out of your way. Beyond the Mat is free on there. It's also on Netflix. Jake the Snake Roberts documentaries on YouTube as well. There's also quite a lot of old WWF wrestling there as well. If you want to watch some of the old Superstars of Wrestling or Wrestling Challenges, the ones with Bobby Heenan and stuff, they are all on YouTube for free. We would not have access to all of this content if it were small regional promotions. Because I'm sorry, but if Aberdeen had a promotion and it wasn't the one that we have just now, that stems from the climate we have, if it was based on the old World of Sport era, the chances are it would be small. It wouldn't be broadcasting its content, and therefore there would be no footage to be aired. by having these national companies, it's huge. But seeing everything that Hulk Hogan has been called over the past couple of years is just, for me, really weird that this would happen, especially when, the allegations about Cody Rhodes being a bit of a dick, which would be an understatement, seem to have been very quickly brushed under the carpet. Whereas Hulk Hogan, rightfully so, pulled up for some things he said as not being acceptable. But you have people who have done bad things and are never removed from the Baseball Hall of Fame, the NFL Hall of Fame, NBA Hall of Fame. Whereas you take a shit in the wrong toilet just now and you'll be removed from the WWE Hall of Fame because they're a publicly traded company. But what's really important here is that Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, as far as we're told, they hate each other. But maybe that's not the case, particularly if you look at the picture that Ric Flair posted. They seem quite happy, and maybe it is just hindsight being 2020. They weren't rivals of each other. They were in competition with each other, which I know sounds very similar, but not quite the same thing. Now, Natalya celebrated her 1500th wrestling match following a victory over Liv Morgan on SmackDown. I'm a fan of Natalya. I think it's very cool that she's still around. She is the first female talent to kind of get up into the longevity of somebody like an Undertaker. Now, people say Mickie James was there before Natalya. Yes, but Mickie James also spent several years away. Mickie James is also not on television every week. Natalya is. So congratulations to Natalya, 1,500 matches. I think that's a big deal, but at the same time, you'd be thinking to yourself, well, wait a second. She's been wrestling now for like 12 years. Based on the old schedule, she'd be in double that at least. So thankfully, she is in a position now, Natalya, rather than just using the pronoun she, Natalya is in a position where she's had longevity, and I don't think her body's as beaten up as her dad's was, or her Uncle Brett, or a lot of the older guys who would have been wrestling on the older rings and stuff. But I think she could still go for another couple of years, and certainly when time comes for her to step back, I think opening a wrestling school and having that next generation trained by the Harts would be really cool. I would love to train under a Hart. Don't think I'd have the patience. I don't think I'd have the ability either. Now, if you're a TNA fan, I still call it TNA, even though it's now Impact Wrestling. During Saturday night's Hard to Kill pre-show, Madison Rayne formally announced her retirement from pro wrestling. She said after well over 12 years and visiting places she's never been to, she's thoroughly enjoyed her run with Impact, but she also had to put over the Knockouts division as being part of the reason why she was so good. Now, Madison's been with the company since 2009, outside of brief appearances for Shimmer, Ring of Honor, and WWE. She's been one of the cornerstones of Impact Wrestling. Now, isn't she married to Josh Matthews, who was the commentator for Impact Wrestling and has just been promoted into a producer role? Congratulations to him. Obviously, that's created a little bit more job security for them, where she doesn't need to work in that field anymore. I'm hoping that it's not a case of she's just kind of going home. I'm assuming Madison Rayne, I'm certain she had side projects when she was in TNA. So it'll be very cool to see what she gets up to in the next little while. I wouldn't put it past her going on the interview circuit for the next little while. I certainly think there's some cool stories she has to tell. Now, cool stories bro. Serena Deeb, who is from the Straight Edge Society, one of the cooler talents that WWE let go in April. She was working as a trainer down in NXT, and she'd been doing producing and stuff up on the main roster. But she was asked on the AEW Unrestricted podcast to give her Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling. And I have to say, I'm not going to disagree with any of these four picks. Bret Hart, who would be my number one pick, Mr. Perfect, Shawn Michaels, and Eddie Guerrero. Personally, I think if you can put better talent on there in terms of in-ring, on the mic, then I'd be surprised. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, and if you're going to have a Mount Rushmore, these are people who've had massive impacts on the business. I couldn't associate with Ric Flair. I couldn't associate with Hulk Hogan. I wasn't a bodybuilder. Still probably not. And Ric Flair, I wasn't as good with the girls. I couldn't associate with that. I could associate with Bret Hart, a guy who saw the competition as being more important. Even Mr. Perfect, he wasn't a bodybuilder, although he looks good. Shawn Michaels was a small guy, although when you hear how tall he is, you're like, why is he considered a small guy? And Eddie Guerrero was just kind of one of us and somehow managed to headline WrestleMania and win wrestling belts. And just, I can't think of four guys I would rather have, or even one guy that would replace any of those four. Because if you were to turn around to me right now and say, right, let's put Ric Flair on there, but you have to pick one of these guys to get rid of. Well, I'm not cutting Bret because Bret's the reason I watch wrestling. I'm not cutting Mr. Perfect because without Mr. Perfect, that entire era of talent, the Bret Harts, the Shawn Michaels, don't get that singles run. The SummerSlam 91 match between Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart was a huge factor in what really altered that Intercontinental division. And I know they'd had big matches at WrestleMania with Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat, but the belt had become a joke after that and had been kind of placed on novelty characters. I'm not going to mention too many names. Honky Tonk Man is a novelty character, Ultimate Warrior. But then you go to Eddie Guerrero, and CM Punk is credited with the smaller guy getting the push. Eddie Guerrero and He Who Shall Not Be Mentioned when you're talking about WWE, they are the two guys who really spurred this small person movement. And in light of the events, you can't put Chris Benoit on. Because if you put Chris Benoit on, what you do is you bring up the stories about what happened when he died. With Eddie, he was taken from us too soon. It's very much that Kurt Cobain thing of, he was so good, what else could he have done had he stuck around a little bit longer? And for me, it brings the image of Legion of Doom. Now, I know we just lost Animal, but the story of Hawk and his death is really, really cool. I don't mean cool in the sense it's cool that he died. I just mean, if I was to go, this is how I want to go. He was helping his wife move into their dream home, and the last box was packed away, ready to go, and he said he needed to go and do something. He went, and that was it. I mean, it was almost like he just had to get all this stuff finished before he went. And for me, it's never a great thing if somebody has to go, but it's kind of poetic that he was able to finish what he was doing. And it was almost like that was his goodbye. Now, talking of goodbyes, there was an Instagram Q&A session yesterday, the 16th, and during it, a fan asked Amanda Huber how Brody Lee proposed. Now, this is, personally, I think if you just propose in the traditional way, I find it boring. But if you propose in a way that's completely different, like I have done in the past, with a Haribo ring, which less said about her, the better. Anyway, this is what she had to say. He bailed on date night, which I was super annoyed with. There was a knock at the door, and he was on one knee with a kitten who had a ring on a ribbon on its neck. My cat had passed away a few weeks prior, and I was heartbroken. He was upset that I was more excited about the kitten than I was about the ring. His name is Wiz, and he still lives at my parents' house. That is a cool way to do it. And for me, if you're out there and you're thinking, oh, I kind of want to ask my partner to marry me, if you're just going to grab a ring and ask her, then that's not really the done thing. Don't steal Brody Lee's way of doing it. Find something that means something, because you're going to be telling that story in 30 years' time. Fingers crossed you stay together. But you're going to be telling that story in 30 years' time. You want it to mean something. And if your story is, yeah, we went for a meal and I asked to marry, that's nice. But if the story is something like, I spoke to a celebrity and got the ring sent to them, and they did a video saying, "Oh, this is a really nice ring," showing the ring, and then saying, "Well, this is for you. Turn around and you can see it in person." And then you turn around, and that would be kind of cool. I think that would be cool. You could also do it without sending the ring. You just have them have an empty jewelry box and open it up. Wow, I love this ring. This is really cool. If you want to see it, look behind you. Okay, if somebody does end up proposing in that way, let me know, because that'd be kind of funny. But yeah, it's a nice thing to do. It's a nice way to have that happen. Now, during Saturday's Impact Wrestling pay-per-view, Sami Callihan used a barbed wire wrapped Nintendo 64 controller in his match with Eddie Edwards. Now, I'm not a big fan of Sami Callihan. And when he was in Glasgow, I told him to his face exactly what I thought of him, and he walked on by me. Not that I thought there was going to be any fight or any argument, but I told him on Twitter that I would tell him in Glasgow to his face what I thought of him, and I did. Stuff like this is stupid. It's daft. It's gimmicky. But at least it's better than Joey Ryan. And that's, unfortunately, to use the Jim Cornette thing of, you used to be a dumb fuck, but so many other dumb fucks came along, you went up without even trying. Sami Callihan is now no longer the worst of the worst, even though he isn't any better than he was. So, let's talk about something. If you haven't been following NXT UK, they have lost Toni Storm and several other female talents in recent weeks, recent months even. But they have announced Kaylee Ray will defend her belt against Ginny next week, who became the number one contender, defeating Piper Niven. I really like the set of NXT UK. I know they're still doing it at the BT buildings, and I think it looks really cool. I can't wait to have fans back, but if they're using this set, at least it looks grand. And do you know how simple it is? If you look at it, it's essentially some TVs placed in a certain place and set basic sets. In fact, I'm almost certain the set that they're using has been used in the past by BT Sport for football, and they've essentially just attached a different thing on top of it. So it's very cool that they're reusing stuff. I love when you're watching something on TV and you go, "Oh, I can't recognize that. I remember Roy Keane sat in front of that 2 years ago." Maybe I'm the only one that does that, but I do like doing stuff like that. Now, so we did discuss Ryback talking about WWE contracts. Now, Ricochet apparently had his contract way to expire this year, at least if you believe some. Now, according to Dave Meltzer, who, I always say, don't always believe what Meltzer says, but in this instance, at least there appears to be some credibility to it. Ricochet is signed until summer of 2024, and he signed that deal in 2019, so it was a 5-year deal. Now, Ricochet took to Twitter yesterday to call out an article that said his contract was expiring way sooner than Meltzer was reporting. The WWE star was last in a feud with Retribution as Mustafa Ali. T-Bar, Slapjack, and Mace have targeted him since he made it clear he didn't want to join them. Now, he hasn't been on TV the past couple of weeks. And one of the things that's quite interesting is that, again, led to people saying, "Oh, well, Ricochet's obviously, he's winding up his contract, he's way to leave." Or they just didn't have anything for him and they didn't want him to fly down without the need to. I mean, that to me seems common sense, but why would we use common sense? Now, talking of common sense, we're not going to mention this too much when we do the Raw and SmackDown stuff later on, but the obstacle course challenge has been added to SmackDown. Now, in place of my opinion corner, let's throw something in here. This is stupid. You have Bayley, who I'm not a fan of, who debuted Ding Dong Hello, which is just ridiculous. And it's not ridiculous in the sense that it gets heat. It's X-Pac heat. It's go-away heat. I will not watch those segments. I'll just skip by them. And they had Bianca Belair as the first guest, and they announced that they're doing the obstacle course challenge next week. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to watch that. And that's on the show that's actually doing well. So, yeah, just imagine WWE are doing well and they have to throw out hokey stuff just to appeal to Vince. Now, Michelle McCool tested positive for COVID-19. She says she's only got mild symptoms and nobody else in the house. She's married to The Undertaker, by the way, and they have a kid. Nobody else in the house is experiencing any symptoms. And apparently she's been very careful. So it shows that anybody can get it. So if you're out, wear a mask, even if you don't think it's going to help. But for the love of God, if you see me in town, if you're in Aberdeen, don't make me have to turn around with my 3-year-old in my arms and tell you to move the fuck back. It's getting ridiculous now. I personally don't want you anywhere near me anyway. Even more so with COVID. But hopefully, Michelle McCool only has mild symptoms and gets past it. Hopefully, that's where we all end up, where it just becomes like the cold. We take 2 days off work and then we're back to normal. A couple of paracetamols and a Lemsip and we'll be fine. Now, WWE put out a very funny video, which is Triple H and Stephanie announcing all the details for what's going to be happening at WrestleMania. And one of the things that's quite interesting is they come up with names. Anita Reelman was Stephanie's. Henry Pankey was Triple H's, which is just weird. They also had some appearances by John Cena and several other people. What they did was they announced that WrestleMania 37 will be the 10th of April and the 11th of April at the Raymond James Stadium. However, WrestleMania 38 and 39 will be one-night events again. WrestleMania 38 will be at the AT&T Stadium in Dallas on April the 3rd, 2022. And WrestleMania Hollywood will take place April the 2nd, 2023 at the SoFi Stadium. Now, one of the things that I find quite interesting here is this means that they don't expect fans to be there for this year's WrestleMania. I don't think anybody would. So for me, I'm a huge, huge supporter of them going to 2 nights. I think it's going to be interesting to see how they split that. Certainly, I think Roman headlining one night, Drew headlining another would be a very, very good call there. But that does leave something else, which is the Hall of Fame ceremony. Now, with the news that WrestleMania is going to be 2 nights, many people were left wondering about how the other events would be treated: NXT TakeOver, SmackDown, Raw, and the Hall of Fame. So, the plans for WWE are to hold a virtual Hall of Fame ceremony this year with no fans. WWE moved the 2020 class back to this year. It appears any possibility for a 2021 class has been delayed, at least for the time being. I think, to be honest, don't do one at SummerSlam. Just wait till next year and induct more people then. But for those that don't remember, this year's class is the NWO, Batista, JBL, the Bellas, Jushin Thunder Liger, and the British Bulldog. Finally, the British Bulldog will get into the WWE Hall of Fame. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the 2 that I want to see are Jushin Thunder Liger and the British Bulldog. Now, obviously, Harry Smith is not under contract to WWE. He's also, at the minute, I believe, having his MLW contract run out. It would be a very cool statement for Harry Smith to appear and accept on his father's behalf, along perhaps with his sister, but also then to announce that the British Bulldog is coming back to WWE. Now, I know he's not the British Bulldog, but he has used that gimmick out on World of Sport and various other places. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do with that. Now, that's the end of the wrestling news. What we're going to do now is we're going to very quickly fire through some of the stuff that's happened on wrestling TV. So this week, of course, was night 2 of New Year's Smash, and it featured 6-man action. Now, before we go, take one little quick look at the ratings for AEW Dynamite. So they had December 9th was 995,000, then the 16th had 806, then we had 23rd of December at 775, December 30th was 977,000, and then January 6th was down at 662,000. Seems like a really, really bad week. Of course, there was obviously the riots in the Capitol. At the Capitol, which would have massively impacted what was going on there. But what's really interesting is that New Year's Evil only garnered 641,000. So more people still tuned into Dynamite than tuned into NXT. Both shows obviously impacted by what was going on in the news. But to be fair, AEW for me have not been as good as people think. Now, I know Stuart Murphy mentioned it in the New Year's special. I know that JJ Andrews hasn't been going out of his way to watch it either. We have had some rather lackluster shows from both NXT and AEW. So let's kind of look at some of the bits and bobs of what happened in AEW. Miro defeating Chuck Taylor, which actually saw a lot of comedy from the Miro character. And having a young character beside him now is just going to make that comedy worse. He did look like a monster in the match from what I saw, but hopefully Chuck Taylor sabotages the wedding. There's some fallout. Miro steps away from this story, and everything works out. But at the minute, it makes no sense that Miro's in there. We then had the inner circle is another thing that was quite interesting. He was kind of pissed. MJF was kind of pissed that the crowd were booing the fact that Santana noted his New Year's resolution was to learn how to make a family recipe. And I don't know, it just seems like a really weird thing to boo. But then Chris Jericho decided the official tag team of the Inner Circle is an awful idea for Team Harmony. It's almost like all members of the Undisputed Era entering the Dusty Rhodes Classic. I don't understand why you would mention what the other side are doing, because the Dusty Rhodes Classic is actually going to put on some good matches. But we'll move on. We saw Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers defeat Danny Limelight, Griff, and Brian Pillman. I'm going to be honest. I mean, I was hoping for more from Brian Pillman, just being thrown into these kind of weird matches. And I know they've got the set for Britt Baker for the segments that she's doing. It was weird comedy that didn't work. The stuff that people mock WWE for, but all of a sudden it's very, very good. I don't understand why. I mean, I said this before in a previous show. If you are willing to accept comedy from one company, you should accept it from both. But it's almost like one company gets a buy and one company gets shat on from a high height, even if they're doing the same stuff. I'm sorry, but the waiting room and the obstacle challenge on Smackdown are the same stupid crap that I'm going to skip through, because I just can't watch those things without feeling like it just makes a mockery of what I'm watching. I like comedy, but people can be funny without being funny. Jim Cornette was funny. Jim Cornette didn't have to do all this kind of stuff. And when he did, once or twice in his entire career, it meant something. Whereas if this is a weekly segment, that's all it's going to be. Jurassic Express defeating FTR. It's almost like FTR just back exactly where they were before. And people say, oh no, this is going to get them over because they're now involved. Well, they're involved with jobbers. So basically the difference here is they're on TV, whereas in WWE, they were on TV and they were losing to people they probably shouldn't be if they're a well-respected, high-up tag team. But hey-ho, it's okay if one company does it, not if the other does it. Darby Allin and Brian Cage, great match. Not a massive fan of the Darby Allin gimmick, but I do like that match. It was a good way to it was the last thing I saw this week was Darby Allin and Brian Cage. It was very good. Now, Taz, who is involved in that segment because of Brian Cage, he actually had some criticism for JR this week. JR said that a few guys came in and said that they felt Taz was unsafe and didn't want to work with him. And Taz says that's bullshit. Where's the list of this? JR was talent relations. The best person to know this would be JR. Taz is saying, well, nobody's proved that I was unsafe. Well, you don't have to prove you're unsafe. They just have to say they don't want to work with you. And the evidence lines up because your entire push stalled very quickly. And you never worked with top guys. You worked with Hunter. Who else did he work with that was a top guy? He worked with Kurt Angle at Royal Rumble 2000, but then he was working with, Bradshaw and Crash Holly in a hardcore match very quickly after that. And there's a reason for it. Now, if we move from the AEW show, when it comes to NXT, it does feel bigger. It does feel different. And the Undisputed Era did advance in the Dusty Classic. Pete Dunne did make a statement. There was a really cool bit where they had Kyle O'Reilly pulled through the metal. It's almost like the speaker stands they use at concerts. And they had Kyle O'Reilly pulled through there to kind of try and do some damage. Very, very cool. The tension at the top of that company with the Pete Dunne faction and the Undisputed Era, and then you throw in Finn Balor's kind of involved in there as well. I thought it was really well done. The Dusty Classic this week also saw the addition, finally, of MSK. MSK, who are they? I say finally. The stuff only went up this week, but MSK were actually the name escapes me. The guys from Impact Wrestling, the Stoners. Anyway, it's Nash Carter and Wes Lee of MSK made an immediate impact by defeating Isaiah Swerve Scott and Jake Atlas. Now, for me, they look different. They act different. It's not just, two black guys, two white guys. It's two friends, almost kind of like the best friends in AEW, but with a difference. These guys are actually good. And the Dusty Classic designed, I think, specifically for them. At least I think so. Now, Xia Li, who's done bits and bobs over the years, I think she was in the Royal Rumble last year or the year before. She looks very, very good. The segments they've had up with her and the other guy whose name escapes me, but they've been doing these segments of basically punishing torture. I think I'm intrigued as to where this is going to go. Clearly, there's some reason behind this, but I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens when these talents get put in against other guys, because they've been almost kind of neglected and ignored. So for them to come back with this big, strong attitude, it should be good. I mean, I'm hoping it's good. It'd be a wasted opportunity if they didn't do anything with it. Talking of wasted opportunities, Breezango in the Dusty Rhodes Classic. And they faced off against the Undisputed Era. This was against Roderick Strong and Breezango, and Adam Cole, rather. This was their main event. And in terms of in-ring action, I would actually argue that NXT had the better show this week, but online, some people are saying, there's some bigger matches on AEW. I think overall NXT was the better show this week. And it just goes to show you, though, during the Monday Night Wars, Raw was the better show for over a year before the ratings actually reflected that. And the ratings that we're seeing, as I've said before, are probably still not demonstrating the actual battle when you consider that how many people are watching it on the network, because we don't see the network figures. Now, when you look at AEW and they're doing this storyline with Kenny Omega going over into Impact Wrestling, you've seen Kenny Omega, Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson teaming up on AEW, which was to promote the Hard to Kill pay-per-view. But we did see Karate Man versus Ethan Page in a cinematic match. Haven't seen it. Told it's been very, very well received. We obviously have the Barbed Wire Massacre with Eddie Edwards and Sami Callihan, which I've not seen all of it, but I have seen the spots that everybody's talking about. And that Nintendo 64 controller one, it's daft, but at least he's not Joey Ryan. Let's look at it that way. We did see the six-man Rich Swann, Chris Sabin, and Moose, who replaced Alex Shelley. The new commentary team, though. Now, this is the bit that kind of gets me. Impact Wrestling had Josh Matthews, who, for me, is a great commentator. But what they've done is replace the commentary team. And I think when it comes to Impact Wrestling, Joey Matthews has become the voice. I'm very confused by the choice they've made. Now, when it comes to announcers of any kind. Matt Striker, for me, at one point, was the next in line. I felt he was very good at his job. Then he kind of got released by WWE, and he seemed to kind of bounce from one job to another. But every job he's went to, he's done really well, and he's been able to carve out a little career for himself. And it looks like he's the new permanent announcer for Impact Wrestling, joined by D'Lo Brown. Completely left field, but D'Lo Brown's actually a good talker. It just depends what's going to happen here. I mean, this might be an experiment. Certainly D'Lo Brown, I don't think he'll have a permanent job. I think that might be, let's see how he does, because it's kind of cool. But I'm intrigued. I like Matt Striker. I like D'Lo Brown. I just did not see those two guys being made the announce team for Impact Wrestling. Now, Raw saw Keith Lee and Sheamus clash after teaming up for a match. You also saw Drew McIntyre doing a promo from his head because he has COVID and he can't show up to the arena. We also saw Charlotte pretty much turned on by her dad. Actually, that sentence sounds quite weird. Her dad stabbed her in the back. That still sounds wrong. Ric Flair is the dirtiest player in the game, and he was even willing to be the dirtiest player in the game to his daughter. Wow, I had to try and get around that. And that still kind of sounds wrong. You know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so the other thing that kind of intrigues me is we're seeing more and more traffic in the fact that Ronda Rousey's looking to get back and she may be training and stuff. If she is, I think that'd be kind of interesting. I certainly think if she were to return and win the belt, we could then see Becky return and get the belt from her a second time. That would be a very cool story to see. But what was not so much a cool story for me, I enjoyed it, and then they burnt Bray Wyatt, which was obviously a dummy, and now we're having Alexa Bliss throw petrol on herself, and we're having fireballs being thrown at Randy Orton. Triple H stepped up, and it was quite cool to see Triple H on Raw wrestling. He stepped up. When he took a sledgehammer out from under the ring, it went on fire mysteriously. And when it went on fire, the lights went out, the Triple H disappeared, and there was Alexa Bliss. Randy Orton had a fireball thrown at his face. The show went off the air. Nobody answered where the hell Hunter went to, but I suppose if the USA Network are wanting bigger spectacles, I think they possibly want things that could be shared on Twitter and promote the show quite easily. Oh, this happened on Raw. Well, if that happened, I'll tune in on Monday just to see what the hell they're going to do next. The problem is, I don't know where this goes. It just seems weird. And we did talk about the Ding Dong Hello segment from Smackdown earlier. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I think it's very cool that we saw Daniel Bryan and Cesaro. We then saw Shinsuke Nakamura and Jey Uso. Two great matches, but more importantly than that, Shinsuke Nakamura got back his actual theme music, which is just the best thing to happen in wrestling this week. The other thing that's kind of cool is that they did sign the contracts for this match with Adam Pearce, and Adam Pearce limped his way out the building, turned around and says, actually, as a WWE official, I can actually pick my replacement, seeing as I'm so clearly injured, and I pick this man, and it was Kevin Owens. So we get Kevin Owens versus Roman Reigns 3. I certainly think that it would have been interesting to see Adam Pearce, the former NWA champion, step in the ring with Roman Reigns, but Kevin Owens is a very, very good substitute. I don't see Kevin Owens winning, though, and that's the thing that I think will be quite troublesome for them, is everybody knows he's not going to win. And what's quite interesting is if you look at the Royal Rumble card right now, what we have is Roman Reigns versus Kevin Owens, Drew McIntyre versus Goldberg. We can assume we're going to get Big E versus Sami Zayn, Bobby Lashley versus Riddle, possibly Asuka and Charlotte versus Nia and Shayna Baszler. And that would be the majority of the card, minus, of course, the Women's Battle Royal. And the men's Royal Rumble, not Battle Royal. I believe Nia Jax, Charlotte, Bayley, Bianca, Mandy Rose, and Dana Brooke have actually confirmed that they're going to be in the Women's Royal Rumble. The males, they have Daniel Bryan, Bobby Lashley, AJ Styles, Randy Orton, Otis, Jey Uso, and Cesaro. Now, for me, the good money is on Daniel Bryan, but you know what WWE is like. WWE are just going to go, well, I don't want to do that. I mean, it makes sense. The fans wanted it before. This could be Daniel Bryan's last run. Daniel Bryan is that kind of nucleus on SmackDown, and I thought he would be drafted to Raw, give him that final run on Raw in front of the Raw fan base. Everybody argues it's the same fans, but it's not. I would have thought he would have got that last run on Raw, and he might still get that. But I think it'd be a huge loss for SmackDown, because you look at every week for that he's been on TV, he's having good matches, he's helping to get people over. And people always argue, well, you know, like he worked with Drew Gulak, and Drew Gulak wasn't at his level. Daniel Bryan will tell you himself, in terms of in-ring ability, Drew Gulak probably doesn't have 100 peers. He is very, very good. Chad Gable is somebody else he's been working with, and Otis is somebody that he's kind of picked up with recently as well. So it's interesting to see what Daniel Bryan's doing. But let's make that brave and bold prediction right now. I'm going to say that WWE are not going to screw this one up, and we're going to get Daniel Bryan as our Royal Rumble winner this year. Now, in terms of the female Royal Rumble, now that one, WWE have this habit of messing around, and for me, there's a huge danger they're going to turn around and give it to Charlotte again. Yeah, I'm going to make the bold prediction, because the rumor is that Rhea Ripley's moving to the main roster. I think that's the call I'm going to make. Rhea Ripley's going to win that Royal Rumble, and Charlotte's going to be the last person she eliminates. It's a call back to last year's WrestleMania, and it's not an actual defeat in a match, so you still have the ability to tell that story. And I think Rhea Ripley going after Asuka would be a huge, huge match for WWE. I think that would sell tickets if it was in an arena we could have fans. I don't see her going after Sasha Banks. I don't see the sense in that. She would want to try and beat Asuka like Charlotte did, leading to that payoff with Charlotte and getting that match. If I was telling the story, that's how I would do it. So, for the first time in a long time, we do not have a CWF video ending the show. That kind of happened earlier. And in light of the content of that video, CWF is going to take a few weeks off. They're not going to be featured on the show. At least, they're not going to be featured in any content that I'm producing. So, for the time being, we're going to let Murphy kind of realize what he's done. But that's it from us from Headlocks and Headphones. We'll see you next week.